Stockfish, the unbeatable king of chess. Can it hold its crown against its creator? The legendary showdown between Stockfish 16 and its creator, Stockfish Father HAL, an enigmatic grandmaster with an incredible Elo of 9,000, promises to be the clash of the century. Who will emerge victorious in this pinnacle of chess competition? Stockfish 16, commanding the white pieces, will face off against Stockfish Father HAL, the one who knows it better than anyone, taking the black pieces. Join Chess Focus as we delve into this historic battle of minds and machine to witness an epic duel for the ages. Granted the white pieces by Stockfish Father HAL, Stockfish 16 boldly opened the game with 1 e4. Stockfish Father HAL quickly countered with 1 e6. White followed up with 2 d4, establishing a central pawn duo, and black responded with 2 d5, contesting central control. White developed the knight to c3 with 3 nc3, aiming to claim dominance over the center, an aggressive move that has become a hallmark of the French defense's sharpest lines. Black struck back with 3 bb4, pinning the knight and pressuring the e4 pawn. In classical French defense theory, the strongest response here is 4 e5, gaining a spatial advantage. However, Stockfish 16 anticipated that Stockfish Father HAL, as the creator, would have prepared extensively against this line. Instead, White opted for the unconventional 4 ne2, aiming to surprise the opponent. Black continued with 4 nf6, increasing pressure on the center. White pushed 5 e5, attacking the knight, forcing it back with 5 nd7. Sensing the opportunity, White stormed forward with 6 f4, creating a formidable central pawn trio. With the pawns at e6 and the knight on d7 blocking key diagonals, Black advanced 6 b6, aiming to develop the light-squared bishop to either a6 or b7. White responded with 7 g3, reinforcing the strong pawn chain while preparing to fianchetto the bishop to g, controlling the long diagonal from h1 to 8. Black continued the plan by playing 7 bb7, and White followed with 8 bg2. Concerned about White stabilizing the position and then breaking open the kingside with an f5 pawn thrust, Black played 8 to fortify the structure. However, despite Black's defensive preparation, Stockfish 16 fearlessly pushed 9 f5, sacrificing the pawn to launch a full-scale kingside offensive. Black captures the pawn on f5, and White castles, quickly mobilizing the rook to the f-file. Black trades the bishop for the knight on c3, with White recapturing using the knight on c3. Black then moves the rook to g8, placing a heavy piece on the open g-file to attack White's king. Undaunted, White develops the bishop to e3, fortifying control over the a7 g1 diagonal. Black counters by leaping the knight to c6, aiming to accelerate development and bring more pieces into play. Unexpectedly, White boldly sacrificed a knight on d5. Thinking it was advantageous, Black captured with the pawn on d5. But without hesitation, White captured the f5 pawn with the rook, gaining a material advantage. Black retreated the knight to f8, adopting a defensive setup to block potential pawn breakthroughs. White advanced the queen to h5, joining forces with the rook to attack and threaten the f7 pawn. Black swiftly responded by moving the queen to d7 for defense. White then developed the bishop to h3, aiming firepower at Black's queen and preparing for a potential open attack. Black advances the rook to g6 to establish a defense line on the 6th rank. White doubled rooks on the f-file, increasing pressure on the f7 pawn. In response, Black retreated the knight to d8 for additional protection. Against Black's robust defensive structure, White repositioned a rook to f2 to solidify the 2nd rank. Under relentless pressure from White, Black attempted a counterattack on the queen's side by advancing the pawn to a5. White pushed the pawn to c3 to stabilize the queen's side, but Black immediately advanced the pawn to a4, threatening to disrupt White's pawn structure by pushing to a3. After fortifying the queen's side, White deployed the bishop to g5, posing the threat of eliminating the knight guarding the f7 pawn. If Black tried moving the knight to e6 for reinforcement, White would exchange the bishop for the knight on d8. After Black recaptures with the knight, White would infiltrate with the queen to h7, exposing the Black king. When Black retreats the bishop to c8, White delivers a check with the queen on h8. If Black's king moves to e7, White plays rx f7+, and after Black recaptures with the knight on f7, White delivers rx f7+, forcing Black to recapture with the king. Then White would capture the bishop on d7, and if Black recaptures with the bishop, White captures the rook on a8. This sequence leaves White in a dominant position with a queen against a rook and a bishop, along with two connected passed pawns on the queen's side and an advanced passed pawn on e5. Black's scattered pieces would struggle to coordinate defense. Returning to the actual game, unable to protect the f7 pawn without material loss, Black opted for a daring move, advancing the knight to e6. This blocked the h3-c8 diagonal while also targeting White's bishop on g5 in conjunction with the rook. White calmly retreated the bishop to h6, avoiding the incoming attack. Black repositioned to e7, but White suddenly accelerated the attack by capturing on f7 with the rook, breaking through Black's defensive lines. Undeterred, Black captured the rook on f7 with the queen. Prepared to exchange the queen for two rooks, White recaptured with the second rook, and Black took back with the king. White then deployed the bishop to f5, targeting the now pinned Black rook. Black swiftly mobilized the rook from the corner to e8 to strengthen the position. Not wanting to prolong the game and risk unforeseen complications, White immediately captured on g6 with the bishop. Black recaptured with the knight on g6, allowing White to bring the queen to f5 with a check. Black shifted the king to e7 in to evade the attack. White followed up with a bishop retreat to g5, delivering yet another check. Unwilling to leave this dangerous attacker on the board, Black took the bishop with the knight on g5. White responded by capturing on g5 with the queen, delivering another check. This sequence brings us once again to the well-known fortress of three generals battling Lubu. However, White's advantage lies in the passed pawn on e5 and a superior pawn structure on the king's side, offering the potential to create an additional passed pawn. Black moved the king to d7, only for White to land a check with the queen back on f5. Black retreated the king to d8, and White dove the queen down to f7, threatening to capture the pawn on h7. In this situation, if Black moves the rook to e7 for defense, White will bring the queen down to g8 for a check. Black's king would move up to d7, and White would push the pawn to h4, threatening to advance to h5 and trap the knight. Returning to the game, with no way to defend both the knight and the pawn on h7, Black retreats the knight to e7, and White immediately captures the h7 pawn, forming a dangerous pair of connected passed pawns on the king's side. Black moves the rook to g8, trying to slow White's pawn advance. White brings the king to g2, while Black activates the bishop by moving it to c6. White positions the queen on f7, lurking for an opportunity. Black retreats the bishop to e8 to attack the queen, but White calmly repositions the queen to f6. Sensing an opening, Black moves the rook to g6 to chase the queen. White retreats the queen to f8. As the White queen keeps hovering, Black moves the rook back to g8, driving the queen away. White retreats the queen to f6. And Black once again plays rook g6. White pulls back the queen to f8 And yet again, black moves the rook back to g8, repeating the sequence in an attempt to secure a draw. Frustrated by this stalling tactic, white changes the plan, moving the queen to f1. Black develops the bishop to d7. White returns the queen to f6, resuming the pressure. Noticing the queen's movement, black again advances the rook to g6 to chase the queen. However, this time, the position has shifted. White delivers a check with the queen on f8. Black blocks with the bishop on e8, and white begins advancing the h-pawn, signaling the start of an aggressive kingside push with the connected passed pawns. Feeling the pressure, black retreats the rook to g8 to attack the queen, but white calmly moves the queen back to f6. Black, aiming to counterplay on the queen's side, pushes the b5 pawn to reinforce the a4 pawn. White moves the king to h2, stepping out of the rook's potential attack lines. Black activates the rook with rook g4, but white counters by retreating the queen to f1. Black sacrifices the h-pawn and moves the bishop to h5 in a desperate bid to create counterplay. White wastes no time, capturing the b5 pawn with the queen. Black shifts the rook to e4, threatening to drop it to e2 for check. White counters by capturing the a4 pawn, creating another passed pawn on the queen's side. Black invades with rook e2+. White steps up the king to h3. Unable to gamble further, black retreats the rook to e4 to block the advancement of the a-pawn. White moves the queen to b5 to defend the pawn and escort it down the board. Black delivers a check with the bishop on g4, forcing white's king back to g2. Black pushes the c6 pawn to drive the queen away and bolster the d5 pawn. White sidesteps to b8 with a check. Black moves the king to d7, and white follows with a check from b7, forcing black's king back to d8. White then retreats the king to f1. Out of options, black plays bishop e2+ for a quick probe, but white calmly moves the king to g1. Getting nowhere, black pulls the bishop back to g4. White seizes the moment to check again with the queen on b8. Black moves the king to d7, but white continues relentlessly with a check from d6. Under white's aggressive attack, black retreats the king to e8, allowing white to push the h5 pawn forward, further strengthening the kingside attack. If black captures the h5 pawn with the bishop, white will immediately advance the e5 pawn to e6, threatening a decisive invasion. Should black attempt to activate the knight with nf5 to open an escape route for the king, white will deliver a crushing check with qd7. Black's king moving to f8 would allow white to swing the queen to h7, attacking both the bishop and knight, creating a dominating position with strong attacking prospects. Meanwhile, black's pieces remain scattered and lack coordination, leaving black vulnerable to white's continued assault. Returning to the actual game, unwilling to risk capturing the pawn, black pushed the rook down to e1 to deliver a check. White moved the king up to f2 to drive the rook away. Black retreated the rook to e2 for another check, but white moved the king back to f1. Unable to continue checking the white king, black captured the pawn on b2 with the rook. White then advanced the pawn to h6, now just 2 steps away from promotion. Black responded with a check by pushing the rook down to b1, and white moved the king up to f2. Black repeated the check by retreating the rook to b1, b2, and white returned the king to e1. At this point, black finally captured the pawn on a2, clearing out white's connected passed pawns on the queen's side. White then brought the queen to f6, defending the h8 square to secure the pawn's path to promotion. Acting on instinct, black delivered a check with the rook on e2. White moved the king to f1. Facing no alternative, black made a daring move with the knight to f5, increasing the attacking pressure on white's king aiming for an all-or-nothing assault. Of course, such an elementary trap wouldn't fool Stockfish. White coolly moved the queen to c6 for a check, forcing black's king to f8. White followed with qf8+, pushing the king to g8, and then qg6+, compelling black to retreat to h8. If white advanced the pawn to h7, threatening to promote with mate on g8, black could respond by maneuvering the knight to e3 for a check. White would then move the king to g1, and black could repeat checks with the rook on e1 and e2, hoping for a perpetual and a draw. Back in the main game, white instead captured the bishop on g4. Black eagerly jumped the knight to e3 for a check. White responded by capturing the knight with the king on e2. Black recaptured on g4. Seizing the momentum, white pushed the pawn to e6, forcing black into a defensive position. Black moved the king to h7, aiming to attack white's central pawns while activating the king. White didn't give black time to consolidate. With a thrust of the pawn to c4, white initiated a breakthrough. Black retreated the knight to f6 for defense, but white captured on d5. Black recaptured with the knight, and white advanced the king to f3, ready to support the pawn's journey to promotion. Black repositioned the knight to c7 to block. Undeterred, white pushed the pawn to e7. Black placed the knight on e8 to shield, and white advanced the king to f4. If black took the pawn on h6, white could respond with kf5. Should black move the king back to g7, white would infiltrate with key 6. If black stepped up to g6, white would push the d-pawn forward. Even if black delivered a check with ending 7, white could sidestep to d7. Black retreating to f7 would allow white to mobilize the g4 pawn. Black moved the knight back to e8. White would push g6. Eventually, white's 3 unstoppable connected pawns, on d6, e7, and g6, would overwhelm black's defenses. Returning to the game, black moved their king to g6, attempting to block white's king from advancing. White swiftly pushed their king up to e5. In response, black maneuvered their knight to c7. White advanced the pawn to d5, forcing black to retreat the knight to e8 for defense. White continued with a pawn push to d6, prompting black to fall back with their king to f7. White marched the h-pawn to h7. At this point, recognizing the futility of further resistance, Stockfish Father HAL resigned, avoiding the risk of Stockfish 16's relentless assault causing a CPU overload, or even a system crash. In the scenario where black attempts to resist, the game would proceed as follows.